Hello, techies. Welcome to the Tech Ties Africa podcast, where we'll bring you the latest stories on tech and startups in Africa. Catch us every Thursday at 10 a.m. WAT on techtiesafrica.podbean.com. Let us know what you think by giving us feedback in the comments or on our socials. Now, on with the show. So today we'll talk about SendStack and one of their co-founders stepping down, RiseVest acquiring a US broker license, the issues with instant cross-border payments in Africa, and a few other topics. So let's start with SendStack. Their co-founder, Ifeoma Uwobu, steps down as the startup undergoes a second pivot in, I think, 5 months.
Yeah.
And it was quite shocking in the ecosystem because she is kind of the face of SendStack. So her leaving was quite a shock.
Yeah. And I think also for me, being very selfish at this point, her being a female in the startup world is always a win for our gender. So it was quite a shock for me as well, as she was not only the face, but she was also an encouragement to other females in the startup world. But I do think that they have had quite a few pivots as a company, and I think there's a difficulty for them when it comes to aligning their product and their services with the market. I think there's a product fit issue that they're trying to figure out. I don't know whether that's how you're seeing it, Kelvin. And I think while there's a big importance to be very adaptable in the startup world, it's also very crucial to validate the business model and to do your market research before you go live. Especially in the African market, I think this is a challenge that we've discussed a lot on Startup Graveyard articles. The market fit in Africa is a bit difficult because of the variety of people that we have. But I think that the consistent pivots create two things. Number one, it becomes very expensive for the startup. And number two, you start losing trust with investors because it seems you're not clear on the direction. That's how I feel about it. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so I think we talked about Max.ng a couple of episodes ago. Yeah, and they are also another startup that has done a couple of pivots. So I noticed that both of them are in the logistics sector. So Max.ng, their latest pivot is to electric vehicles.
Yeah.
SendStack now as well, we see that they keep on trying to pivot because you go into the logistics space with so much enthusiasm that, okay, you will be the one to solve this problem. You will be the one to break through. And then when you start solving the problem, I think you realize that there are a lot of challenges that maybe you were not aware of before you enter the space. And so one thing we now see with a couple of logistics startups is they do at least one pivot, usually more, within the first 3 to 5 years. I think it's just the challenges. It's well talked about, the challenges of logistics in Africa. So I think that's what we see a lot with these logistics startups. And in terms of why she left, maybe there was some disagreement on the direction the
Yeah.
company was heading in, or maybe something else.
Logistics is a big giant in Africa in terms of policies, in terms of infrastructure. But I think it's a good problem because it means there's a lot of opportunity. But I also think that figuring it out, even for companies that are not in logistics themselves, is a big problem in the African continent.
Yeah.
So talking about Africa and opportunities, we are seeing another win for us. Last week we were really excited about the Money Point win, and this week we have another. Nigeria is doing really well. My God. So RiseVest is a Nigerian fintech company, and they just secured a US broker dealer license that enables them to offer direct investment of opportunities in the US stock market to its users. And I think this positions them to expand their global reach and to diversify their service offerings and the portfolio that they can give to their clients, which is really exciting.
Yes, it is. especially as a RiseVest user myself. I was happy about that. Well, RiseVest has been communicating with customers about a challenge they've had with Nigerian regulators recently. So they are winning on the international stage, but locally they seem to have a couple of regulatory issues. But they are proactively working with the government to solve this. So I think they are good because what happened was they were trying to get into Nigerian stocks and managing basically what they do for US stocks. And the SEC said they didn't have the correct licenses to do this. But they were operating under the assumption that one of the startups they acquired, Chaka, had this license. So they were operating under that license. But it seems that wasn't valid, so they are currently working with the regulators. But globally, RiseVest has been making a couple of moves in recent times. They acquired Chakra a couple of years back, and then they acquired a Kenyan startup, Hisa, as well, about a year ago at this point. And now they have gotten this US broker license. So they are making moves, and it's really good to see.
Yeah, they're making really good moves. I actually did not know that they acquired HISA because I was a client of HISA and then I kind of stepped back from it. And so now you've piqued my interest and I'll go take a look at that. I tried to look at other African, especially Kenya, being a Kenyan, I tried to look at whether we have any fintech companies that have this license, and apparently we don't. And I believe RiseVest is the second one in Nigeria after Bamboo. So this is an awesome move for us in terms of building user trust, because to get that license means you're following very stringent regulatory standards, and it also builds a name for Africa that we're able to trade in this market. In previous times, it's always been very difficult as an African investor to get into some of these markets, so that makes it a lot easier. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of competition and innovation will come up in the fintech space as a result of this, and to also see if other companies will try and follow suit and what that will look like. So that's a really exciting move for me.
Yeah, I think we would see a couple of other startups follow suit because it was a big thing when Bamboo got their license. A couple, I think it's about a year or two now at this point. So it was a big thing then, and it's a big thing for RiseVest as well. So I think we'll start to see more and more of these trends. But speaking of regulation, central bank executives have said that the problem with cross-border payments is not a tech problem. I mean, broadly speaking, it's more of regulation, and it isn't even about infrastructure as well. It's more of regulation, investment capacity, and political will. I mean, we are both in Nigeria and we work together, so we know the challenges of trying to send money from one country to another.
Yes.
And when you hear like these executives from these central banks talking about it's not a tech issue, you have to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked in banking for about 8 years, and we had a cross-border product. The bank I was working for was Morocco owned. It's an African bank, and it had branches across Africa, I think more than 25 countries. And we had this cross border product, but it was hardly being used, even just in East Africa, between Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. It was not being used. And it wasn't that our customers did not know about it, and it wasn't that our customers were not doing cross border business, but for some reason, the payments were just not as heavy as we expected them to be. I'm going to go a little political here, just forgive me for a moment, but I have always been against the colonial boundaries that were placed in Africa. I do not believe in them. I think Africa should be one country. I honestly do, with different states or something of the sort. But I've always been a believer in being one country with one president and one currency, and that would build us as a giant. Now, I don't know whether that will ever happen in the future because I feel even African Union is quite weak in the manner that it builds policies and looking at the future of where Africa needs to go. Now, that is me going on a tangent because it's something I'm very deeply passionate about. I think I've spoken about it previously as having one currency that we can all use, but you can see a deep reluctance in our leaders to do that. Perhaps it's that some of us have currencies that are quite strong. The Kenya shilling is a very strong currency in Africa. The South African rand is also a very strong currency. And I think part of the issue is people don't want to give that up, but also figuring out a way to create that uniformity. I think that's a big challenge, and I don't know what thoughts you have on that. I'd really like to hear from you in terms of that aspect of having one currency. And even in West Africa, you guys have been trying to come up with one currency for quite a long time. In East Africa, we've been discussing it since I was in high school. I am now almost a grandmother and still nothing, you know?
So African leaders, I think I would go on a very long tangent if I start talking about African leaders, so I won't. um, in terms of like the actual issues, like you mentioned, countries like Kenya and South Africa have strong currencies. Then there are other countries that have weaker currencies. The problem is how do we settle between these currencies? So that has been one of the issues.
Yeah.
We have a model to look at with the European Union. They all use the euros, and well, that solves that problem. But I think one thing I've always said with Africans is that a lot of Africans individually can be successful, but we have always had issues when it comes to collective growth. And I think a big reason that happens is because there are just so many cultural differences. Even within Nigeria, for example, you have like 500 languages and some dialects and something like that, just within one country. So there are so many cultural differences. It's hard to kind of rally a group around one common goal to the point that all of them believe in that common goal over tribal loyalties. Because even like on an individual level, you just need to enter Twitter and see when some of the major tribes like Igbo and Yoruba are having arguments, you start to see that this bubbles all the way to the top. These cultural differences bubbles all the way to the top. And it just makes it harder to make these things happen. And then you're now talking about an entire continent. It's not impossible, but I think there just needs to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, propaganda for why this would be good for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think even beyond the currency, there are other policies that come into play. Like, how do we do KYC across borders? Because the data policies that are in, for example, Nigeria and data policies that are maybe in Rwanda are very different. Yeah. When a country like Nigeria that has spent a lot of time with cross-border payments, I think you guys have very fast payment systems. And then you go to maybe a country like Somalia, where they're still growing, they're still coming up with policies. That becomes a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's one area that Nigeria can get credit for in terms of the innovation that has been invested in financial technology. And so, yeah, because we have dealt with this for a long time, that's why we seem a bit ahead. So, how do you get others to catch up? So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting challenge to solve, an interesting puzzle, and that's why we have a lot of fintechs in Africa. We did write an article about that a while ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, eventually we would. I like to be optimistic sometimes. I believe we would figure things out and to get better.
Yeah, I think as more of Africa goes into digital transformation, we will see that. And still on the topic of digital shift and transformation, there's a MasterCard report that came out on Kenya's SME shift, and it's showing that 91% of Kenyan SMEs have adopted digital payments, with 97% planning to offer seamless payment methods, which is a shift driven by the need for efficiency, security, and meeting evolving customer expectations. And in Kenya specifically, I think we're a cashless economy. It's very rare. If I go somewhere, I am one of the few people who like cash because it helps me spend a lot more intentionally as opposed to just spending on my phone. But you'll give someone cash and they're like, you pay in cash. It's very rare in Kenya for people to pay in cash. It's a cashless economy.
So in Nigeria, we had a policy, I think in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, where the government, the CBN wanted the economy to move towards a cashless based economy. So they put some regulation about how much cash you can withdraw from ATMs, and POSs. It was a very hard shift. Nigeria before then, most people were like you. They preferred to carry their cash, especially with small, medium-sized enterprises. So everything was cash based. But after that policy, as well as some other issues that we did have with lack of cash because they pulled back a lot of cash from the economy. Now we have adapted. Most places are now cashless. Most of it is powered by POS devices. And a lot of it, like I said a couple of episodes again, is from Money Point's POS. Everywhere you turn, you see Money Point POS. So it's mainly card based. But these POSs also allow you to accept bank transfers as well. So now even the women in markets are selling their small goods and services are also now comfortable with the cashless economy. So I think it's good. It brings the rural areas closer to the urban areas. For me, I've always leaned more on being cashless. So even before the cashless policy, you would barely see me carrying a lot of cash. I like to see my money on the screen. I like to see my money on the screen, and part of it is also security reasons as well. But yeah, that feels more comfortable for me. It's good to see that this trend is also like in other countries as well in Africa.
Yep. And I think we have very good digital and fintech solutions when it comes to the finance space, some much better than even developed nations. I think that's something that we should take pride in. We have had innovations in the financial space as far as digital money and digital transfers are concerned. We have solutions that even first world countries are looking at to learn from. Like for Kenya, M-Pesa is a big thing across the globe, right? It's something that people are studying and trying to figure out how, and even the adoption of it is so insane when you compare it to other countries. And I think we had this discussion a while back. Also, the people of that country really determine adoption because the same thing has been introduced to Ethiopia and we're seeing a slower adoption, right? So looking forward to seeing how that continues to grow and even how that will affect the cross-border payments we just talked about.
True, true. So adoption, M-Pesa is so massive. It's pretty much a monopoly, right?
Yep.
But then it's because I think the product itself is good. I mean, you can speak about this, but it has to be good, right?
It's excellent.
Exactly. And other countries are now looking at how they can adopt these mobile money solutions as well as other solutions from M-Pesa. So it's definitely good. And yes, we do have a very good financial technology in Africa. Is well developed, but I think it can get better, especially when it comes to cross-border payments like we just talked about. Moving on, a Nigerian edtech startup, Edukoya, shut down over the last week. they raised $3.5 million in pre-seed funding in 2021. That's the largest pre-seed funding, at least disclosed pre-seed funding for any African startup. So when I saw the story, I was very shocked because pre-seed funding is like it's still very much an idea, and for investors to put that amount of money, there must have been something that really sold them on it. And EdTech is an area that a couple of people have taken a stab at solving in Africa for a couple of years now, 5 to 10 years now. And we haven't really seen anybody crack this. So I'm curious, what do you think are the issues in this sector?
So I've always struggled to understand EdTech and what it's trying to solve. But what I'll say is this. I think investors are quick to invest in EdTech in Africa because of the numbers that we have. We have so many young people who are now at the point of requiring education. And as a continent, we're now seeing more of our people educated than ever before. Education sector is a huge market for Africa. And that makes it very exciting because I think I saw some numbers. I can't remember quite the number, but it's a huge expected return or rather growth of this industry in Africa. The biggest challenge is infrastructure. The biggest challenge is the amount of parity that we have. What do I mean? We will have, like, for example, in Nairobi, you will go to a school in Karen, which is one of our richer areas, and the students there are paying school fees of about 1 million shillings a term, right? They have every infrastructure that you can imagine, right? You go to a school like St. Francis Turi, where some kids are dropped in choppers, right?
Does that actually happen?
In terms of children being dropped in choppers,
Yeah, does that actually happen?
yes, we have a lot of students. Even in Nairobi, a child lives outside of Nairobi, like Nyeri County, and in the morning, their parents drop them with a chopper to school. That's a thing in Kenya.
Wow.
So we have that. And those are schools that are investing in EdTech, right? Because their parents are able to afford all manner of gadgets in the house. Now, on the flip side, we have children who are learning under trees. They don't have classrooms. When is that child ever able to come across gadgets and devices? And even a blackboard is a problem, let alone a display, right? While there are these schools that are very high end, they're not the majority. The majority is where there's a class of 100 students and one teacher.
Yeah.
And while our governments keep talking about equipping these schools, it doesn't seem to be a priority for most countries, which is very disheartening. And so I think EdTech cannot take off until some of these issues are solved. And so investors and startups in EdTech have to be part of the movement of trying to see how we can create a little more parity in the education system. I mean, we went to university with students who, even right now, they're children who see their first laptop in the university. And it's not theirs, it's their roommates, right?
Yeah.
So that is the biggest problem. Infrastructure, you may have really good solutions, but majority of the people do not have access to that. And so I think creating solutions, number one, that maybe can be accessed on phones, and not just smartphones, but phones that are on the other side, like I don't know what they're called, USSD kind of access to these things would be one way. And then making sure that they are as affordable as possible. I think that is one of the biggest problems that I see, that there are very good solutions, but these solutions are not able to cut across the entire population.
True.
My 2 cents. I went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did touch on a lot of solid points where purchasing power is still quite low for a majority of people. in Africa. So if you want adoption at scale, it's still not yet there because the people don't have the purchasing power yet. I think another challenge is internet. So sometimes the internet, not sometimes, a lot of times, internet is not reliable. At least in Nigeria, and I've heard across Africa there are challenges there as well. So for someone in Nigeria, even talking about something like remote work, you need to have a couple of internet service providers. You just can't have one. So that if one of them is not working well, you switch to the other one. Like that one is not working, you switch to the other one. So this is also a challenge that would affect people that want to even use the EdTech, but well, internet in their area may not be the best. So then you can't really access those people. So there are some challenges there with EdTech, and I think that plays into the reason why we haven't like seen one massive EdTech come out of Africa. Old school Africa though seems to be doing well. I would just mention
Mm.
them. They seem to be doing well. They have recently expanded into Europe. Obviously, expansion is a sign of good health, but I think based on some of the founders that are involved there, I think they have something good going. So I guess we'll see in a couple of years how that plays out.
Yeah, very true. I think there's still a lot of work to be done between the investors, or rather the startups, and even government and education leaders across Africa. Now, speaking about connectivity, we have drama in Kenya. The county government in Nairobi has cut down internet cables in Nairobi County to businesses, to schools, because they're having an issue with Kenya Power. So both of them have unpaid bills. So Nairobi County has some unpaid bills to Kenya Power, totaling to billions, and Kenya Power as well the same. So usually a lot of internet service providers will use the Kenya Power lines. So you know the electricity lines, right? And
Yeah,
they'll use that to distribute internet. So the county has decided to just cut down those lines, and they're going to schools, they're going to businesses, and it's just drama in Nairobi right now because they have taken their issues and spilled them over to the public. And actually, it's weird because Nairobi County last week decided to just drop garbage at the gates of Kenya Power. I don't know what kind of games these people are playing. Yeah, so I am sure that Nairobi businesses are having a hard time right now.
yeah, it sounds very petty and messy. Yeah, when you see these companies actually go into that level, I don't really know what to make of that. But I think we have too many internet cuts in Africa for one reason or the other. In recent years, we've seen governments in several African countries somehow restrict access to the internet during elections. And we have this issue now in Kenya with two companies having pretty much a pissing contest. And I saw a report recently that says Africa is one cable cut away from pretty much shutdown of the internet because our submarine cables do not have many backups.
Hmm.
So internet seems like it's in a fragile place in Africa at the moment, especially with politics. And I mean, even with this issue with Nairobi County and Kenya Power, you can say it's like local politics that's going on.
Yeah.
So it's scary for somebody like me that lives on the internet, right? So I benefit from having the internet up. I think we need to invest more into making sure that our internet infrastructure is more durable.
I agree with you, and I'm interested to see how maybe companies like Starlink and other satellite focused internet service providers will help solve some of these issues, right? I'm really interested to see that, especially being a freelancer. Internet is everything to me. I'm really grateful that in Kenya we have really good, really fast speeds. I don't take that for granted at all. I hardly ever have internet issues. So that's something that I know many African countries struggle with. I traveled to Somalia 2 years ago, and it was it's an eye-opening to see some of these differences as you're traveling. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how companies like Starlink maybe will solve some of these issues for us going forward.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Tech Tides Africa podcast. Remember, leave a comment or share with your friends. We'll see you next Thursday at the same time and place you get your podcast. Until then, stay well.